Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. When I think back to that time, it still sits in the back of my mind in a way that nothing else really does. Years have passed, and I've replayed it more times than I can count, trying to line everything up in a way that makes sense. I've gone over every detail, every second, every possible explanation I could come up with, but it never fully settles. There's always something that doesn't quite fit. Something that keeps it from being just another strange memory you can brush off and forget. What makes it even more frustrating is that I wasn't the kind of person who believed in anything like that. Not even a little. I used to be very logical about things. If someone told me a ghost story, I'd immediately assume there was a normal explanation behind it, even if it wasn't obvious right away. Shadows, sleep, tricks of the mind, anything like that made more sense to me than anything paranormal. I didn't like the idea of things existing outside of logic, so I never entertained it. That's why that night bothers me as much as it does. I was in college at the time, living in an older off-campus place with 3 roommates. It wasn't anything special. The building had clearly been around for a long time. The floors creaked when you walked across them. The walls were thin enough that you could hear people talking in the next room if they weren't careful. And everything had that slightly worn-out feeling to it. It wasn't scary, though. It was just what you'd expect from cheap student housing. Because of the way the place was, there was always some kind of background noise. Doors opening and closing, footsteps in the hallway, someone getting up late at night to grab food or use the bathroom. You get used to it after a while. It becomes part of the environment, something you don't really notice anymore. Still, I always locked my door before going to sleep. Not because I was afraid of anything serious, but because of the usual roommate stuff. People messing around, walking in without knocking. Doing something stupid just for the sake of it. Locking the door was just a simple way to avoid all that. It gave me a sense of control of my own space. There was one more thing about me that mattered a lot in this situation. I cannot sleep with the lights on, not even a small one. It's always been like that. Even the faintest bit of light is enough to bother me. So every single night, without fail, I would turn everything off before going to bed. My floor lamp, my desk lamp, anything that could produce light. I would check it more than once sometimes, just to be sure. Total darkness is the only way I can sleep. That night didn't feel different at all when it started. I went through the same routine I always did. Got ready for bed, turned off both lights, checked them, locked my door, and lay down. There was nothing strange in the air, no weird feeling, no sense that anything was off. It was just another normal night. At some point, though, something pulled me out of sleep. It wasn't a sound. That's the part that stands out the most. Usually, when you wake up suddenly, there's a reason. A noise, a movement, something that breaks your sleep. But this wasn't like that. It was light. I remember my eyes opening slowly, that heavy feeling of being half asleep still there. For a moment, I didn't even understand what was wrong. I just knew something was different. Then I realized the room wasn't dark anymore. That alone was enough to confuse me. I lay there for a few seconds, trying to figure it out. My brain felt slow, like it was catching up piece by piece. Then my focus sharpened, and I saw it clearly. Both of my lights were on. My floor lamp and my desk lamp, both fully on, lighting up the entire room. It wasn't dim or subtle. It was bright enough that it pulled me out of sleep completely. I just stared at them. There was this moment where everything paused, where I was trying to process something that didn't make sense. I knew I had turned them off. I didn't just think I had. I was certain of it. That was part of my routine, something I never skipped, because I physically can't sleep with lights on. So how were they on? At first, I tried to come up with a simple explanation. Maybe I had woken up at some point during the night, half asleep, and turned them on without remembering it. But that didn't sit right. Why would I turn on both lights? And even if I did, there's no way I would fall back asleep with them on. That's just not something I can do. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I pushed myself up slightly, sitting there in bed looking around my room. Everything looked exactly the same as it always did. Nothing had been moved. Nothing was out of place. It was just my normal room, except now it was filled with light that shouldn't have been there. And then something caught my attention. It was small at first. Just a movement, something subtle enough that I almost didn't notice it. It was coming from one of the posters on my wall. At first, my brain didn't register what I was seeing. It was like I was looking at it without fully understanding it. But then the shape became clearer. It was a face, a woman's face, right there on the surface of the poster. Not part of the poster itself. I knew what was printed on it, and this wasn't that. This looked separate, like something layered over it. It had depth, definition, a presence that stood out from everything else in the room. Even now I can picture it clearly. Her features were distinct, not blurred or shadowy. She looked real in a way that's hard to explain. At first, she wasn't looking directly at me. Her gaze was turned slightly to the side, as if she was focused on something else entirely. Her expression was calm, almost neutral. There was nothing obviously threatening about her in that moment. It didn't feel aggressive or hostile. It just felt wrong, because she shouldn't have been there. I stayed completely still, staring at her, trying to understand what I was seeing. My mind was racing, but my body didn't move. It was like I was waiting for it to make sense. And then her eyes shifted. Slowly, deliberately, they moved until they met mine. That was the moment everything changed. The expression on her face shifted instantly. It wasn't gradual, it was sudden and sharp, like a reaction that she couldn't control. The only way I can describe it is that she looked surprised, almost startled, like she hadn't expected me to be awake, like she hadn't expected to be seen. It was such a human reaction that it made everything feel more real, not less. If it had been something vague or distorted, it might have been easier to dismiss. But this felt like a genuine moment between two aware beings. For that split second, it felt like we were both looking at each other, fully aware of what was happening. And then she disappeared. Not slowly, not fading away. One moment she was there, completely clear, and the next she was gone. Just like that. The poster was back to normal, flat and unchanged, like nothing had ever been there. I sat there, completely still, my heart racing. I didn't move right away. I was trying to convince myself that I had imagined it, that it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, something caused by waking up suddenly in a brightly lit room. But that explanation didn't cover everything. It didn't explain the lights. After a while, I forced myself to get out of bed. I looked around the room first, carefully, checking everything. Nothing was out of place. Nothing had been touched. It was exactly how I had left it. Then I went to the door. It was still locked, exactly the way I had left it before going to sleep. I unlocked it and stepped into the hallway. The house was completely quiet. No one was moving around, no doors opening or closing, no voices. I checked on my roommates one by one. They were all asleep, exactly where they should have been. No one had been up. No one had come into my room. There was no explanation there. I went back inside and just stood there for a while, trying to make sense of everything. To this day, I still don't have an answer. I've tried to explain it in every logical way I can think of. Maybe I was still dreaming. I'm caught in some kind of half-awake state, where things felt real but weren't. Maybe it was a hallucination, something my brain created in that moment. Maybe there was some kind of electrical issue that caused the lights to turn on and everything else followed from that. But none of those explanations fully fit, because it didn't feel like a dream. It didn't feel unclear or distant. It felt sharp, detailed, real in a way that dreams usually aren't. I can still remember her face, the exact moment her eyes met mine, the sudden change in her expression, and the timing of everything, the lights, the locked door, the silence in the house. All of it together makes it harder to dismiss. I still don't consider myself someone who believes in ghosts. I haven't suddenly changed into someone who thinks there's something out there watching us. The logical part of me is still there, still trying to hold on to a rational explanation. But at the same time, I can't ignore what I experienced. I know what I saw. And honestly, the part that stays with me the most isn't just the fact that I saw a face where there shouldn't have been one. It's the expression. That look of surprise, like she had been caught off guard. Like she wasn't supposed to be seen. Because whatever that was for that brief moment, it didn't just feel like I was looking at something. It felt like something was looking back at me just as clearly. When I think about my dad now, the first thing that comes to mind isn't anything serious or heavy. It's his sense of humor. He was always joking, always trying to get a reaction out of people, especially me and my mom. He had this way of making even normal, everyday moments feel lighter. Even when things were stressful or quiet, he would find some way to break that silence with a joke or a silly comment. One of the things he used to say, and he said it more than once, was how he'd come back and mess with us after he died. He would laugh when he said it, like it was the funniest idea in the world. Sometimes he'd say he was going to pull our legs while we were sleeping, and other times he'd say he was going to haunt me specifically until I started getting straight A's. He'd look at me with that half-serious, half-joking expression, like he was making a deal with me that I didn't really have a choice in. At the time, it was just one of those things you laugh off. You don't think about it too deeply because it's clearly meant as a joke. It was just him being himself, playing around, getting a reaction. I'd roll my eyes or laugh it off, and my mom would usually tell him to stop being weird. It was normal. It was part of who he was. Then he passed away. That changed everything, of course. The house felt different without him. It's hard to explain unless you've experienced it, but there's a kind of silence that settles in when someone like that is gone. Not just the absence of their voice, but the absence of their energy, their presence. The jokes stop, The random comments stop, and everything feels a little heavier than it used to. Over time, things started to feel more normal again, at least on the surface. You adjust, even if you don't fully get over it. Life keeps moving, and you find your way through it. But there are always moments where something reminds you of them. Something small that brings everything back for a second. About a year after he passed, I had one of those nights where I stayed up way too late. I was playing Fallout 3, completely lost in it, like you get with those kinds of games. The house was quiet. Everyone else had gone to sleep, and it was just me. The soft glow from the TV, and that late-night feeling where everything seems a little more still than usual. It wasn't creepy or anything. It was just calm. I was lying on the floor on my stomach, with my legs stretched out behind me and partly under the bed. It was just a comfortable position at the time. The floor felt warm, and I wasn't really thinking about anything except the game. Hours had probably passed without me even noticing. Nothing about the moment felt strange. Then, out of nowhere, I felt it. 2 hands, cold hands. They grabbed both of my ankles at the same time. The feeling was so clear and so sudden, but there was no moment of confusion. It wasn't like something brushed against me or something light touched me. It was a firm grip. I could feel the fingers wrap around my ankles, solid and unmistakable. And then they pulled, hard. My body slid forward instantly, dragged under the bed up to about my thighs before I could even process what was happening. It happened so fast that there wasn't time to think. 1 second, I was lying there playing my game, and the next, I was being pulled. The cold from those hands stayed with me, even in that moment. It wasn't just the movement, it was the temperature, that unnatural cold that didn't match anything around me. I reacted without thinking. I scrambled forward as fast as I could, pulling myself out and basically launching myself onto the bed. My heart was racing, and adrenaline hit me all at once. I didn't stop to look under the bed, didn't stop to question anything. I just needed to get away from that space. As soon as I was on the bed, I reached over and turned on the light. The room filled with brightness instantly, pushing back the darkness that had been there just seconds before. I sat there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My first thought was my brother. It had to be him. That was the only explanation that made sense in that moment. It felt like a prank, like something he would do just to mess with me. So I started yelling, cussing at him, calling him out, expecting him to pop out from somewhere, laughing or trying to act innocent. But nothing happened. There was no response, no movement, no sound. I looked around the room, really looked this time, checking every corner, every possible place someone could be hiding. There was no one there. I even checked under the bed, even though part of me didn't want to. There was nothing, just empty space. The door hadn't opened. There was no sign that anyone had come in or gone out. The whole room was exactly how it had been before, except for me sitting there, trying to calm down. I didn't sleep much after that. The feeling stayed with me, not just the fear, but the confusion. It didn't make sense. I kept going over it in my head. I'm trying to line it up with something logical, something that could explain it in a normal way. But nothing really fit. The next morning, I told my mom. I expected her to be concerned, maybe even a little worried. But instead, she just smiled. Not in a dismissive way, not like she didn't believe me, but in a calm, almost knowing way. She said, "Don't worry. He just wanted to scare you." That was it. No panic, no questioning, no trying to explain it away. Just that. And as strange as it sounds, that actually made me feel a little better. Not because it explained what happened, but because it connected it to something familiar. To him, to the way he used to joke around, the things he used to say. He had always said he would mess with us, that he'd pull our legs, that he'd come back just to annoy me or make me do better in school. It was always said as a joke, something you laugh at and forget about. But in that moment, sitting there the next morning, hearing my mom say that so casually, it made me think about it differently. I don't know what really happened that night. I still try to think of logical explanations sometimes. Maybe it was some kind of muscle reaction, or maybe I was so focused on the game that my mind played a trick on me. Maybe there's some explanation I just haven't figured out yet. But that feeling was real. The grip on my ankles, the coldness of those hands, the force that pulled me, it didn't feel imagined. It didn't feel like something my mind created out of nothing. And the timing of it, a year after he passed, in the middle of a quiet night, when I was completely alone, it makes it harder to ignore. I don't sit around thinking my dad is still around, watching or doing things like that. I haven't experienced anything like it since. Life moved on, and that moment stayed as just that. A single experience I can't fully explain. But every now and then I think back to it. And I remember the way he used to joke, the way he would say he was going to pull our legs. And I can't help but wonder, just a little, if maybe he wasn't entirely kidding. When I think back to that place, it's not just the house itself that comes to mind. It's the feeling that seemed to sit quietly underneath everything. At first, it didn't really bother me. It was just another college house. Big, a little worn out, the kind of place that had seen a lot of people come and go over the years. The floors creaked in certain spots. Doors didn't always shut properly. And you could hear movement from one end of the house to the other if things were quiet enough. There was a story attached to it, though. Everyone who lived there knew it, even if they didn't talk about it much. About 20 years before I moved in, a student had fallen off the balcony and died. It wasn't something that came up in normal conversation, but it was always there in the background, something people mentioned casually. Like a piece of history tied to the place. On top of that, a few people I knew who had lived there before me had mentioned strange experiences. Nothing too dramatic, just small things that didn't quite make sense. At the time, I didn't take it seriously. College houses always have stories like that. It's easy for things to get exaggerated or misinterpreted, especially in old buildings where noises travel and things shift. So I moved in without really thinking much about it. For the most part, life there felt normal. There were multiple people living in the house, and it was rarely completely quiet. Someone was usually around, moving through the halls, talking in another room, or coming and going at odd hours. You get used to that kind of environment quickly. It becomes background noise, something you stop paying attention to. But there were moments when the house felt different. The first experience happened during finals week. It was late, and I was studying in the dining room. I remember that clearly because I had been there for a while, going over the same material again and again, trying to stay focused. The house was completely empty that night. No roommates, no noise, nothing but the quiet that settles in when a place is used to being full of people, but suddenly isn't. The dining room had a ceramic tile floor, and the sound of anything moving across it carried easily. To my left was a long hallway that led straight to a metal door at the end. It was one of those heavy doors with a large horizontal press latch, the kind that makes a distinct sound when you push it open. From where I was sitting, I had a clear view down that hallway. There were no corners or blind spots. If someone walked through it, I would see them. At some point, I heard the metal door open. It was a very specific sound. The latch being pressed, the door shifting, that slight metallic noise that you can't really mistake for anything else. But I didn't react to it right away. My first thought was that one of my roommates had come home. That was normal. People were always coming in and out. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Not just vague movement, but clear, defined footsteps moving down the hallway toward me. What stood out the most was the sound. It wasn't sneakers or soft shoes. It was the hard, distinct sound of leather-soled dress shoes hitting the tile. Each step echoed slightly, sharp and consistent. At first, I kept studying. I assumed it was just someone walking in, maybe dressed up from somewhere they had been earlier. The sound continued, steady and unbroken, getting closer as it moved down the hallway. Then it got close enough that I instinctively looked up. I expected to see someone coming toward the dining room, but there was no one there. The hallway was completely empty. I remember just staring for a moment, trying to process it. The sound had been so clear, so real, that there was no doubt in my mind that someone had been walking there. It wasn't faint or distant. It had moved all the way down the hallway toward me, but there was nothing. I sat there for a few seconds, waiting, half expecting someone to step into view or say something. When nothing happened, I tried to brush it off. Old houses make noises. Sounds can travel in strange ways. I told myself it was probably something like that. So I went back to studying. About 20 minutes passed. The house was quiet again, completely still. Then I heard the door, the same metal door at the end of the hallway. It made that exact sound again, like someone had pressed the latch to open it. This time I reacted immediately. I looked straight at the hallway, expecting to see someone there. But again, there was no one. The hallway was empty from end to end. No movement, no shadow, nothing. Before I could even fully process that, another sound came from somewhere else, from the basement. It started suddenly and violently, like something was being hit over and over again. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like someone was taking a baseball bat and slamming it into the washing machine. Loud, aggressive, repeated impacts that echoed through the house. It didn't sound accidental. It didn't sound like something falling. It sounded deliberate. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain it. I didn't sit there and think about it. I didn't investigate. I didn't call out. I just reacted. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and ran out of the house as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was outside, away from it. That night stuck with me, but I still tried to find ways to make sense of it. Maybe someone had come in and left quickly. Maybe the sounds were coming from somewhere else. Maybe there was some explanation I just hadn't figured out yet. But then there was the second experience. This one felt different. It happened late at night on a different day. I had just come home, and again, the house was empty. It was quiet in that same way. The kind of quiet that feels heavier when you know you're alone. I was walking through the ground floor hallway toward my room. That hallway was narrow and not very long, just a short stretch connecting different parts of the house. My room was near the area where the student had fallen years before. I remember the temperature clearly. The house didn't have air conditioning, so it was usually warm inside, especially during certain times of the year. That night, it felt normal at first, probably around 75 degrees, comfortable enough. Then, without warning, the temperature changed. It dropped suddenly, not gradually, not slowly. It felt like stepping into a completely different space. Within seconds, it felt like the temperature had gone from warm to cold, something closer to 50 degrees. The shift was so sharp that it caught me off guard. I felt it across my entire body. Goosebumps rose instantly, not just on my arms, but everywhere. It wasn't just a chill, it was intense, like the air itself had changed around me. I looked down at my arms. Every hair was standing straight up. It looked unnatural, almost like there was static electricity running through me. The sensation was strange, like the air had some kind of charge to it that I couldn't explain. And then came the feeling. It's hard to describe, but it wasn't something I imagined. It was a very strong, very clear sense that I wasn't alone in that hallway. That something else was there, not visible, not something I could see, but something I could feel. It felt like I was being watched. Not in a vague way, but in a focus, direct way. Like whatever it was aware of me, standing there, reacting to it. The silence in that moment made it worse. There were no sounds, no movement, nothing to distract from that feeling. Just me standing there, in a space that suddenly felt completely different from how it had just moments before. I didn't stay there long. I moved quickly, not running, but not taking my time either. I just wanted to get out of that hallway and into my room, somewhere that felt more normal. Even after I left that space, the feeling stayed with me for a while. That sense of something being there, something I couldn't see but couldn't ignore either. Looking back now, those two experiences are the ones that stand out the most from that time in my life. I've tried to explain them in logical ways. Old houses make noises, pipes, floors, temperature changes. All of those things can create strange effects. Your mind can fill in gaps, especially when you're alone and already aware of a place's history. But there are parts of those experiences that don't quite fit into those explanations. The footsteps that moved down the hallway without anyone there. The door that opened twice with no one in sight. The violent noise from the basement that had no clear source. And that sudden, unnatural drop in temperature, paired with that overwhelming feeling of being watched. I still don't know what to make of it, but I know how it felt in those moments, and that feeling was real. It's strange how some memories stay with you in a way you don't expect. Not because they were long or complicated, but because of how quickly everything shifted. One moment, it's just a normal night, something you wouldn't think twice about. And the next, it turns into something you can't fully shake, even years later. This is one of those memories for me. Even now, if I sit quietly and let my mind go back there, I can still hear that sound, like it's happening all over again. It was a warm summer night in Louisiana, the kind where the air feels heavy and still, like it's pressing down on everything around you. Nights like that have their own rhythm. The insects never really stop, just a constant buzzing in the background, blending into everything until you don't notice it anymore. The world feels slower, quieter in a different way, like everything is just settling into place. I was at my friend's place, which was a townhouse with a small porch out front. We used to sit there all the time, especially on weekends. It was just something we did. No real plans, no reason, just sitting, talking, passing time. That night was no different. It was a Saturday, and we had been drinking a bit, smoking, just having one of those easy conversations that doesn't really go anywhere but still feels good. Right in front of his place was this open field. It wasn't anything special during the day, just a stretch of grass, a bit uneven in places, nothing that would stand out. But at night, it changed. It turned into this wide, dark space that felt bigger than it probably was. You couldn't see very far into it once the light dropped off, and after a certain point, it just became black. There's something about open spaces like that in the dark. They feel empty, but not really empty. More like unknown. Like there could be something out there, and you wouldn't have any idea until it was too close. At the time, though, we weren't thinking about any of that. We were just sitting there, relaxed, letting the night pass. The conversation slowed down as it got later, like it always does. You run out of things to say, or you just get comfortable with the silence. The world around us seemed to quiet down, too. The distant sounds faded, leaving just the soft noise of insects and the occasional shift of movement from somewhere far off. Then it happened. The sound came out of nowhere. It wasn't gradual or distant. It was sharp and sudden, cutting straight through everything else. It was the kind of sound that makes your body react before your mind has time to catch up. My whole body tensed instantly, like something had just snapped me into alertness. For a second, I didn't even know what I was hearing. Then it clicked. It sounded like a baby crying. Not just vaguely similar, not something you could mistake if you weren't paying attention. It sounded exactly like it. That high-pitched, desperate cry that hits something deep in you. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten and your attention lock onto it immediately. It didn't make sense. We were sitting there in the middle of the night with an open field in front of us, and suddenly it sounded like there was a baby out there, crying. My heart dropped in a way I can still remember clearly. I turned to look at my friend, and he was already looking at me. Neither of us spoke right away, but we didn't need to. The look on his face mirrored exactly what I was feeling. Confusion, concern, and something else underneath it. Something tense. In that moment, my brain didn't question it. It didn't try to figure out how or why a baby would be out there. It just accepted it as real. That's how strong that sound was. It triggered something instinctive. My first thought was simple. There's a baby out there. Something's wrong. And before I could even think it through, my body reacted. I stood up quickly, ready to run straight into the field. Everything in me was focused on that sound. The urgency of it, the way it felt like something needed help right now. There was no hesitation in that first moment. It felt like the only possible response. But just as I moved forward, something else caught my attention. Movement. Out in the field, cutting through the darkness, something was moving fast and low to the ground. At first, it was just a shape, a darker form against the dark background. But as it crossed into a slightly clearer area, I could see it better. It was a cat, but not a normal one. This thing was big, much bigger than any house cat I had ever seen. Its body was long and powerful, moving in a way that didn't look clumsy or casual. Every step it took was smooth, controlled, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Even in the low light, you could see the shape of it clearly enough to understand what you were looking at. It was dark, almost completely black, blending into the night except for the way it moved, and the size of it stopped me cold. It stood high at the shoulder, easily close to a foot, maybe more. That's not something you mistake for a normal cat. Not even for a second. I froze. All that urgency that had pushed me to run forward just seconds earlier disappeared instantly. In its place was something else. Realization. That sound wasn't a baby. It was coming from that animal. I felt my body shift, like something inside me flipped direction. Instead of moving forward, I started stepping back. Slowly, carefully, not taking my eyes off the field. My friend didn't say anything, and neither did I. We didn't need to. The sound came again, and now it hit differently. It still sounded like a baby, but now there was something else layered underneath it. Something rough, something animal. It carried across the field in a way that made it feel closer than it should have been, louder than it had any right to be. That's when it fully sank in. It wasn't a child. It was a panther, a Louisiana panther calling out in the night. At the time, I had heard stories. People would talk about them, say they were out there, but it always felt like one of those things that didn't really affect you. Something distant, something you might hear about but never actually experience. Until that moment. Until you hear it yourself and see it moving in front of you. That sound is something I don't think I'll ever forget. It's one thing to be told that certain animals can mimic sounds, that they can make noises that trigger something human in you. It's something else entirely to experience it without warning, in a place where you feel safe, when you're not expecting anything at all. It messes with your instincts. Your brain hears a baby crying, and everything in you responds to that. You want to help. You want to go toward it. You don't question it. And in this case, that instinct would have taken me straight into that field, straight toward that animal. I kept backing up until I was back on the porch, putting as much distance as I could between myself and whatever was out there. My heart was still racing, but now it wasn't confusion. It was the realization of how close I had come to doing something incredibly dangerous. We stayed there for a while after that. Neither of us really spoke much. We just listened, watched, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The mood had completely changed. The easy, relaxed feeling from earlier was gone, replaced by something heavier. Awareness. The kind that makes you realize you're not as alone as you thought you were. After some time, the sound stopped. The field went quiet again, just like before. The insects filled the space again, and everything looked exactly the same as it had earlier in the night. But it didn't feel the same. That empty stretch of land didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something that could hold things you couldn't see. Something that could shift from harmless to dangerous without warning. That night stayed with me. Not just because it scared me, but because of how real it felt. How quickly everything changed. How easily your instincts can be used against you if you don't stop and think. And that sound is still there, somewhere in my memory. Because for those first few seconds, I truly believed it was a baby. And that's what makes it so unsettling. It's strange how something small can turn into something that stays with you for a long time. At first, it doesn't seem like much, just a little detail that's out of place, something you can easily explain away if you don't think about it too much. But when it keeps happening, and especially when it follows the same pattern again and again, it starts to feel different. It stops being something you can ignore. This happened about 2 years ago when my parents decided to install security cameras around the outside of our house. It wasn't because anything specific had happened to us, but in our area, break-ins weren't uncommon. People had started taking extra precautions, and my parents thought it was a smart move. It felt more like a practical decision than anything driven by fear. The cameras were placed around the house to cover the main areas. One of them was set up to face the side of the house where there was a fence gate. That gate led into the yard, and it wasn't something that opened easily. It had a lock that could be a bit stubborn. Even I sometimes had to try more than once to get it open properly. It wasn't loose, and it definitely wasn't something that would just swing open on its own. Next to that gate, there was a bench. It had been there for a long time. Nothing special, just a simple outdoor bench that had become part of the space. It wasn't light either. You could move it if you wanted to, but it wasn't something that would just tip over without a reason. That area was always quiet. Nothing really happened there. It was just another part of the house that no one paid much attention to. Then my Nana noticed something. It started in a way that didn't seem important at first. One morning, when she went outside to leave for work, she saw that the bench was flipped over. Not slightly moved or pushed to the side, but completely knocked back, lying flat on the ground. She mentioned it casually at first, thinking maybe someone had come by during the night and messed with it. Kids, probably. That was the easiest explanation. Something random, something harmless. It didn't feel like something worth worrying about. She set the bench back up, and that was it. But the next morning, it happened again. The bench was flipped over in the exact same way. At that point, it was a little more noticeable, but still not something that immediately felt serious. It could still be explained. Maybe someone was coming by at night for whatever reason, messing with things and leaving. It wasn't impossible. Then it happened a third time. 3 mornings in a row, the same thing. The bench flipped back in the same position each time. That's when it started to feel off. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt like a pattern, like someone was deliberately coming to that exact spot every night and doing the same thing over and over again. But for what reason, no one could say. My Nana told my mom about it, thinking maybe some kid in the neighborhood was trying to get into the yard or just causing trouble. It made sense. Kids sometimes do things like that just for fun, especially late at night when no one is around. So my mom decided to check the camera footage. At that point, it still didn't feel serious. We were more curious than anything else. We expected to see someone, maybe moving quietly, trying to open the gate, messing with the bench, and then leaving quickly. Something simple, something that would explain everything. We all gathered around to watch. The footage started like any other night. The camera showed the gate and the bench, both exactly where they should be. The yard was still. There was no movement, no shadows passing through, nothing unusual at all. We skipped through hours of footage, watching as nothing happened. Then we found it. It was around 2:30 in the morning. The camera was still, focused on the same spot. The bench was upright. The gate was closed. Everything looked completely normal. And then, without any warning, the gate opened. Not slowly, not like it was being pushed with difficulty. It opened fully, in one clear motion. It was the kind of movement you would expect if someone had unlocked it and pulled it open with force. But there was no one there. No figure, no hand, nothing visible at all. For a moment, none of us said anything. We were just watching, trying to understand what we had just seen. Then, almost immediately after, the bench moved. It didn't shift or wobble. It flipped, straight back like something had pushed it hard from the front. It fell with a kind of force that made it clear it hadn't just tipped over on its own. It looked deliberate, like an action, not an accident. And still there was nothing there. No person, no animal, no movement in the air that could explain it. Before we could even react, the gate moved again. It slammed shut, hard. Not a gentle swing, not something caused by a breeze. It closed with force. The kind of motion that has weight behind it, like someone had pushed it shut with intention. Then everything went still again, just like that. The scene returned to exactly how it had been before, except now the bench was on the ground. We just sat there in silence. At first we tried to explain it. That's always the first reaction. You look for something logical. Maybe it was the wind. That's the easiest explanation. But when we thought about it more carefully, it didn't add up. There hadn't been any strong wind those nights. And even if there had been, wind doesn't open a locked gate fully, then flip a bench backward, and then slam the gate shut in that exact order. The sequence didn't make sense for something natural. We rewound the footage and watched it again. The same thing. Gate opens, bench flips, gate slams shut. Nothing there. We checked the footage from the other nights. It had happened 3 times. Each time around the same hour, almost exactly the same sequence. Almost like it was repeating itself. That's when it started to feel real in a way that was hard to ignore. It wasn't random. It wasn't a one-time event. It was consistent. And there was still no explanation. The part that stays with me the most isn't just what happened, but how clear it all was. There was no distortion in the footage, no shadow you could mistake for a person. It was just empty space, completely still, and yet things were moving as if someone was there. The gate, which wasn't easy to open, moved like it had no resistance at all. The bench, which had weight to it, flipped like it had been pushed with force. And then everything stopped, like nothing had happened. We never saw anyone on camera. No one approaching, no one leaving, no sign of anything that could explain it. And after those 3 days, it just stopped, completely. Nothing like it ever happened again. The bench stayed where it was. The gate stayed closed. Everything went back to normal, as if those nights had never happened at all. But that doesn't make it easier to forget. If anything, it makes it harder, because there's no ending to it, no explanation, no moment where you can say, that's what it was. Now, whenever I think about that part of the house, I don't just see a gate and a bench. I see that footage. I see the empty space in front of the camera. And I remember the way things moved, clearly and forcefully, even though there was nothing there at all. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. I spent part of my childhood, somewhere between the ages of 5 and 10, living in a house that on the surface didn't seem all that unusual. If you looked at it from the outside, it was actually kind of nice. Not perfect, maybe a little worn down in places, but nothing that would make you stop and think something was wrong. Even inside, it felt like a normal home most of the time. There were no obvious signs of anything strange. No dark corners that stood out, no rooms that felt completely off limits. But for some reason, from the very beginning, it scared me. I couldn't explain it back then, and honestly, I still can't fully explain it now. It wasn't tied to one specific thing. It wasn't like I saw something or heard something that made me afraid. It was more like a constant feeling that followed me around inside that house. A quiet kind of fear that didn't go away no matter what I was doing. Before we moved there, I never had nightmares, not once. And after we left, it went back to being the same. But during those years in that house, it was completely different. Every single night, I had nightmares. Not just the occasional bad dream, but intense, vivid nightmares that repeated over and over again. They all had this strange theme that I didn't really understand at the time, but I can see it clearly now. It was always about things not being what they seemed. Something normal would be there, something familiar, and then it would shift into something else, something wrong, something that didn't belong. It got so bad that I couldn't sleep normally anymore. I needed the lights on every single night. Total darkness felt unbearable. I would also play music. Not quietly, but loud enough to fill the room so I didn't have to sit in silence. Silence made everything worse. It made the house feel too still, too empty, like something was waiting in that quiet. There was also my closet. Even now, just thinking about it makes me uncomfortable. Inside that closet, there was a small set of stairs that didn't lead anywhere. They just went up a short distance and then stopped. It didn't make sense. It felt like something unfinished or something that used to have a purpose but didn't anymore. I hated it. At night, I would block the closet door with whatever I could. Chairs, boxes, anything that would keep it shut. It wasn't just a habit. It felt necessary, like leaving it open wasn't an option. Like something about that space was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. And the fear didn't just exist at night. Even during the day, even when I was fully awake, I felt it. That same quiet, constant fear, like something was just out of sight. It never went away while I was in that house. But the strange part is that it was only there, nowhere else. If I left the house, even for a short time, that feeling would ease. But the moment I came back, it returned. Eventually, we moved away. And just like that, everything stopped. The nightmares disappeared completely. It was like someone had flipped a switch. I went back to sleeping normally, peacefully. The fear that had followed me for years was gone. And over time, it started to feel like something distant, like a strange phase I'd gone through as a kid. I grew up and I got used to sleeping again. I actually started to enjoy it. Dreams became something interesting instead of something to dread. Then, about 2 years later, something changed. I was living in a completely different place, a modern apartment in another country. Everything about it was different. New environment, new surroundings, nothing connected to that old house in any way. But suddenly, the nightmares came back. Not just regular bad dreams, but the same kind I had when I was a kid. Vivid, intense, and impossible to ignore. And along with them came that feeling. That exact same feeling. It was like being pulled back into that old version of myself, the one who was constantly afraid. I didn't understand it. There was no reason for it. Nothing in my new home felt threatening. It was safe, modern, completely normal. And yet, whenever I was inside, especially in the hallway, I felt like I was being watched. It was a heavy feeling, one that sat in the back of my mind and wouldn't go away. I would walk through that hallway and feel it immediately, like something was there, just out of sight. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, but the feeling was strong enough that it made me uncomfortable in my own home. I couldn't figure out why it was happening again after all that time. Then my parents told me something, and that's when everything shifted. They said that beneath our old house, there had been a cistern. It had been covered up for years, long before we ever lived there. No one really thought about it. It was just something hidden beneath the surface, forgotten over time. After we moved away, a family friend had started doing some construction work on the house. He was trying to level out the driveway, and in the process, he uncovered the cistern. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. He was a good person, someone we trusted. And he would sometimes bring his daughter along with him while he worked. It was just a way for him to spend time with her while also getting things done. But after the cistern was uncovered, something changed. His daughter started acting differently. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She didn't behave the way she used to. And then she started saying things that didn't make sense. She would ask if she could go outside and play on the porch with the girl with no legs. That's how she described it. The girl with no legs. It wasn't something she said once and forgot about. She kept asking, like it was something real to her, like there was actually someone there. Hearing that alone was enough to make everything feel unsettling. But it didn't stop there. The people who were living in the house at that time also started noticing things. Lights would flicker without any clear reason. They would feel like they were being watched, even when they were alone. Sometimes it was just a feeling, but other times it was more than that. They would see something move out of the corner of their eye, quick and hard to focus on. And sometimes they felt things, like a hand brushing through their hair. When I heard that, it hit me in a way I wasn't expecting, because those were the exact same things I had experienced. Not just in that house when I was younger, but in my new apartment when the nightmares came back. The same feelings, the same sense of being watched, the same kind of fear that didn't have a clear source. It was too similar to ignore. And then, just as suddenly as everything had started again, it stopped. The nightmares went away. The fear disappeared. I could sleep peacefully again, just like before. At the time, I didn't question it too much. I was just relieved. After going through that again, even for a short time, all I wanted was for it to end. Later, though, I found out something else. The family living in the house, along with the man doing the construction, had eventually become so uncomfortable with everything that they decided to cover the cistern again. They sealed it back up. And that was when everything stopped. Not just for them. For me, too. Since then, I haven't had a single nightmare like that. I still dream, and my dreams are still vivid, but they're not terrifying anymore. I actually enjoy them now. I'm not easily scared, and I even like horror movies and stories. It takes a lot to shake me, but there's still something about that house. About a year ago, I went back to visit it. I hadn't been there in a long time, and I thought maybe it would feel different now. Maybe whatever had been there before wouldn't affect me anymore. But the moment I stepped inside, it all came back. That same feeling, that same quiet, heavy fear. It was immediate, like it had been waiting. I didn't need to see anything or hear anything. Just being there was enough. It settled in the same way it used to when I was a kid, wrapping around everything, making the space feel wrong in a way I can't fully explain. I didn't stay long. I didn't want to. Even now, I don't know what it is about that place. I don't know why it felt the way it did, or why it affected me the way it did. I don't know if there's an explanation that would make sense of all of it. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to find out. Some things feel better left unanswered. When I was a kid, there was a long stretch of time where nighttime stopped feeling normal. Going to bed wasn't something I looked forward to anymore. It became something I quietly dreaded, something I tried to delay for as long as I could without anyone really noticing. At that age, you don't always have the words to explain why you feel that way. You just know that when the lights go off and everything gets quiet, something you don't like is going to happen. For me, it started with sound. Every night, right around the time I would lie down and the house would settle into that deep, late silence, it would begin. At first, it was subtle enough that I questioned whether I had actually heard anything at all. A faint shift above me, like something moving very lightly. It was easy to ignore at first. Easy to convince myself it was just the house settling, or something outside. But then it would come again, a little clearer this time. And then slowly, it would turn into something I couldn't ignore. Scratching. Not loud, not aggressive, but steady. Close. Too close. The kind of sound that makes you aware of the space above your head in a way you normally never think about. It felt like it was happening just inches above me, right on the other side of the ceiling. Scratch. Then again. Scratch, scratch. Then a little faster. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I would lie there completely still, staring up into the darkness, even though I couldn't see anything. My eyes would be wide open, fixed on a ceiling that looked exactly the same as it always did, but didn't feel the same anymore. The darkness around me felt heavier, like it was holding something I couldn't see. When you're a kid, your mind doesn't go to the most reasonable explanation first. It goes to the worst one. It takes the unknown and fills it with whatever feels the most intense, the most vivid. Things you've seen in movies, things you've imagined late at night, things that don't have clear shapes but still feel real. And once that thought gets into your head, it doesn't leave easily. The scratching would stop sometimes, just long enough to give me a small sense of relief. There would be a quiet stretch where I would start to convince myself that it was over, that maybe I had imagined it, that maybe it wasn't going to happen that night. Then it would start again. And every time it came back, it felt worse. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It never sounded random. It always sounded like movement. Not like something shifting, turning, moving from one spot to another. Sometimes it felt slow and deliberate. Other times it felt quicker, more active, like whatever it was had suddenly decided to move around more. Time felt different when it was happening. Minutes stretched out. The longer I lay there, the more aware I became of every small sound, every tiny shift in the air, every creak of the house. Even my own breathing started to feel too loud, like it didn't belong in the silence. After a while, I started coming up with ways to deal with it. Not in a logical way, but in the way kids do when they're trying to protect themselves from something they don't understand. I would pull the covers completely over my head, wrapping myself in them until there wasn't even a small gap left. It made it harder to breathe, and it got uncomfortably warm, but it felt safer. Like if I couldn't see anything and nothing could see me, then I was somehow protected. I would stack pillows around my head, pressing them against my ears to block out the sound. It didn't work completely, but it dulled it just enough to make it slightly more bearable. In my mind, that made sense. If I couldn't hear it clearly, then maybe it wasn't as close as it felt. That kind of logic doesn't really hold up, but when you're that age, it feels real enough. Some nights were worse than others. There were nights where the scratching barely happened at all. Just a few faint sounds that I could almost ignore. But those nights didn't feel better. In a way, they felt more unsettling, because I didn't know what to expect anymore. Then there were nights where it felt constant. Like whatever was up there was moving around nonstop, going from one side of the ceiling to the other. Those were the nights that stuck with me the most. The ones where I lay there for what felt like hours, unable to relax, waiting for it to stop. I tried telling my parents about it more than once. I explained the sounds, how it happened every night, how it felt like something was right above me. I tried to make them understand that it wasn't just my imagination, that it was real to me. They would come into my room, stand there, and listen. And every single time, nothing would happen. The house would stay completely quiet, like it was proving them right. They would stand there for a minute or two, maybe a little longer, and then tell me it was probably nothing. Just the house, or maybe I was hearing things because I was tired. I don't blame them for that. From their point of view, there was nothing there. No sound, no movement. Nothing they could point to and say it was real. But for me, it didn't change anything. Because the moment they left, it would start again. And that made it feel even more real. It went on for months. Not just a few nights, not something that faded quickly. It became part of my life. Every evening as the day started to wind down, I could feel that tension building inside me, that quiet sense of knowing what was coming. I would find small reasons to stay up longer, anything to delay the moment when I had to get into bed. But eventually, I always had to. And every night, I would lie there, waiting. Then one day, everything changed in a way I didn't expect at all. It wasn't some dramatic moment. It wasn't something that happened at night. It was a completely normal day. My dad was outside doing yard work, just taking care of things around the house like he always did. While he was working along the side of the house, he noticed something unusual. There was a hole. It wasn't in a spot you would easily see. It was partly hidden behind a tree, tucked away in a place that didn't draw attention. But once he saw it, it was obvious that it didn't belong there. The hole led into the attic, specifically the section of the attic that sat directly above my room. That was the moment everything finally made sense. There were squirrels living up there, not just one or two passing through, but a whole family that had made a home for themselves in that space. They had been moving around, nesting, scratching, doing exactly what squirrels do, completely unaware of the effect it was having below. All those nights, all that fear, all those sounds I couldn't explain, it had been them. Looking back now, it feels so clear. The scratching, the movement, the way it would come and go, all of it fits perfectly. It's the kind of explanation that makes you wonder how you didn't realize it sooner. But when you're lying in the dark as a kid, without that explanation, it doesn't feel simple. It feels personal. It feels like something is there, just out of sight, existing in a way you can't understand. Your mind fills in the gaps, turning something ordinary into something much bigger. Once we knew what it was, the fear disappeared almost immediately. There was no mystery left, no unknown to feed my imagination. It was just squirrels, loud, annoying squirrels, but nothing to be afraid of. And just like that, bedtime went back to being normal again. Still, even now I can remember exactly how it felt during those months. Lying completely still under the covers, barely breathing, listening to that scratching above me, convinced that if I moved too much or made too much noise, something might notice. It's strange how that feeling stays with you, even after you know the truth. Because when you don't understand something, your mind will always turn it into something worse than it really is. And sometimes the fear isn't about what's actually there. It's about what you think might be. When I think back to that night now, it still feels strange in a way that never fully goes away. Some memories fade over time. They lose their sharp edges, or they blur around the details until they feel more like something you heard than something you actually lived through. But that memory never softened. If anything, it became heavier as I got older, because now I understand things that I couldn't understand at 10 years old. Back then, I thought I was fine. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought walking home alone that late was just one of those normal things that didn't really matter. It didn't feel reckless to me at the time. It didn't even feel unusual. Looking at it now, that part alone is enough to make me uncomfortable. I was only 10 years old, and it was around midnight when I left my friend's house. Now, even saying that now sounds wrong. A kid that age should not have been out alone that late, walking home in the dark. But when you're a child, you don't think the same way adults do. You don't really understand how quickly a normal situation can become dangerous. You assume that because something has been okay before, it will be okay again. You measure safety by familiarity. If you know the route, if you've walked it before, if nothing bad has happened yet, then it must be fine. That's how I thought then. I don't even remember exactly why I was heading home at that hour. Maybe I had stayed later than I meant to. Maybe plans changed. Or maybe no one thought it was that big of a deal. Whatever the reason was, I left his house alone and started walking home like it was just another ordinary night. I knew the area well enough. The route wasn't complicated. I had been around those streets before, and at first I didn't feel much more than the usual discomfort that comes with being outside late at night. There was one stretch of that walk, though, that I never liked. It was near his house, along a road that always felt darker than it should have been. The streetlights were there, but they were weak, the kind that gave off more of a dull haze than real light. They didn't brighten the road so much as remind you how much darkness was still left around them. Some parts of the sidewalk were lit just enough for you to see where you were stepping, while other parts seemed to disappear into shadow. The houses around there looked different at night, too. During the day, they were just houses, quiet and forgettable. But after midnight, with most of the windows dark and the streets empty, everything felt still in a way that was unsettling. That night, the silence stood out immediately. There were no cars going by, no distant voices from people outside, no barking dogs, nothing. It was the kind of late-night silence where every small sound starts to feel bigger than it should. Even my own footsteps seemed unusually loud, like the road was giving them back to me. I remember trying not to think too much about how empty everything felt. I kept walking at a normal pace, looking ahead, telling myself there was nothing to worry about. For the first few minutes, that was enough. Then I heard something behind me. At first, it was faint, so faint that I almost dismissed it without thinking. It could have been anything. Maybe it was just the sound of my own footsteps echoing in some strange way. Maybe something had shifted in the wind. Maybe it was nothing at all. When you're already a little uneasy, your mind starts grabbing onto sounds and making them feel more important than they are. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer. Footsteps, not mine. Someone was behind me. I turned around to look. There was a figure on the path, maybe 20 or 25 feet back. I couldn't make out his face. The lighting was too poor, and the distance was just far enough to keep him unclear. All I could really see was the shape of him. He looked tall, or at least taller than average, and thin in a way that made him seem even more noticeable in the dark. There wasn't enough light to catch details like eye color or facial features or even what kind of expression he had. He was just this dark figure moving down the same path I was on. That should have been harmless. People walk behind other people all the time. Even at night, that doesn't automatically mean anything is wrong. But what I remember most clearly isn't how he looked. It's the sound. He was wearing tracksuit pants, and as he walked, the fabric rubbed together with every step. It made this distinct swishing noise that cut through the silence in a way I can still hear in my head. Swish, swoosh, swish, swoosh. It wasn't a random sound. It had a rhythm to it, steady and repetitive, tied exactly to the pace of his steps. The street was so quiet that the noise seemed sharper than it should have. Once I noticed it, I couldn't stop focusing on it. I turned back around and kept walking. At that point, I wasn't in full panic yet. I was uncomfortable, yes, but I was still trying to be reasonable. I told myself he was probably just another person heading the same way. There was no proof that he was following me specifically. No proof that he meant any harm. I tried to act normal. to keep my pace steady, to ignore the feeling building in my stomach. But something about it kept nagging at me. It wasn't just that there was someone behind me. It was the way the silence around us made his presence feel larger. The road was empty. The night was empty. There was nobody else there to interrupt the sound of those footsteps and that constant swish of fabric. It felt like the entire world had narrowed down to two people moving through darkness, one behind the other. I tried not to look back again. I thought maybe if I kept walking and acted like nothing was wrong, I would calm down. I focused on the path ahead, on the small patch of sidewalk visible beneath the weak streetlights. I told myself not to overthink it. Then the sound changed. It got faster. At first it was subtle, but not subtle enough to miss. That same swish-swoosh rhythm had picked up speed. The pattern was tighter now, the gap between steps shorter. He had sped up. The second I realized that, something in me tightened. Until then, I had still been trying to talk myself out of being scared. But that change made it harder to ignore what my instincts were already telling me. If he had simply been walking the same way, there would have been no reason for him to suddenly increase his pace the moment I noticed him. I didn't turn around again. For some reason, I felt like looking would make it more real. As long as I kept facing forward, there was still a small part of me that could pretend I might be wrong. But I could hear him. I could hear the pace change. I could hear that sound getting more urgent. So I started walking faster too. At first, it was just a little quicker. Enough to test it. Enough to see if maybe I was imagining things. Maybe if I sped up and the sound behind me stayed the same, I could tell myself it was a coincidence. But it didn't stay the same. It sped up again. Swish. Swoosh. Closer now, faster. That's when real fear hit me. It wasn't the vague kind of unease I'd been feeling before. It was sharper than that. It moved through my chest all at once, making my heart pound harder, making the air feel different. My thoughts started jumping all over the place. I remember feeling that awful combination of wanting to stay calm and knowing I wasn't calm anymore. I pushed myself into a light jog. Even then, I still didn't look back. I don't know if that was bravery or fear or some strange instinct to protect myself from seeing exactly how bad it had gotten. Part of me felt that if I turned around and saw him too close, I would lose whatever control I still had. As long as I kept moving forward, I could focus on escape. Looking back would only confirm what I already suspected. The sound followed me. And again, it changed. Now it wasn't just quicker. It sounded urgent. The swish-swoosh had become sharper and more aggressive, and mixed into it was the unmistakable sound of faster footsteps. He wasn't just matching me anymore. He was accelerating with me. What had started as a walk was turning into something else. At that point, I knew. He was chasing me. There is a certain kind of fear that strips everything down to one single truth. In that moment, all the excuses disappeared. All the rational explanations I had been trying to hold on to fell away. It didn't matter anymore whether I could see his face or whether I knew what he wanted. I knew enough. He was behind me, he was getting faster when I got faster, and I needed to get away. Up ahead, I could see a corner in the path. It wasn't far, but it felt far in the way things do when you're scared. I fixed my eyes on it immediately. In my mind, that corner became everything. I told myself that if I could just make it there, if I could get out of his direct line of sight, then I would break into a full run and not stop. That became the plan. It was simple, desperate, and the only thing I had. So I held on to it. Every step toward that corner felt stretched out. I was walking fast, almost jogging, trying not to break too early, trying not to waste my chance. My chest was tight. My hands felt strange, almost numb. My whole body was waiting. Then, just before I reached the corner, the sound behind me shifted one more time. This time, there was no doubt. It wasn't a jog anymore. It was a full run. Loud, fast, closing in. The sound of those tracksuit pants, that swish-swoosh I had been hearing the whole time, now came in rapid bursts mixed with hard footsteps. It was no longer a distant rhythm in the background. It was immediate. It was real. It was close enough that I felt it like pressure at my back. The second I hit that corner, I ran. Not a controlled run. Not the kind where you pace yourself or think about how far you have to go. I sprinted with pure panic, the kind that takes over completely. Every bit of energy I had went into getting away. My legs moved faster than I thought they could. My arms pumped wildly. My breathing turned ragged almost instantly. But I didn't care. Nothing mattered except putting distance between me and whatever was behind me. I didn't look back. Not once. I knew that if I looked back, even for a second, it might slow me down. And deep down, I think I was afraid of what I might see. Afraid that he would be right there, closer than I could handle. Afraid that seeing his face would make the whole thing even more terrifying than it already was. So I kept my eyes ahead and ran as hard as I could. Everything else became a blur. The houses I passed, the streetlights, the pavement beneath me, all of it stopped feeling real. There was only the pounding of my own feet, the desperate pull of air into my lungs, and that overwhelming need to get home. Time stopped making sense. In reality, it was probably around 15 minutes before I reached my house, but in my memory, it feels much longer. Fear changes time. It stretches it until every second feels heavy. Every moment feels like something could happen. Every step feels uncertain. I kept expecting to feel a hand grab me from behind, or to hear that sound right at my shoulder, but I never let myself stop to check. I just ran. By the time I got home, I was completely spent. My chest was burning. My breathing had gone from hard to painful. I remember stumbling inside, barely able to get enough air, panicking not just from the chase, but from the physical strain of it all. I needed my inhaler, and I remember struggling to get it while gasping for breath, my whole body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. But I had made it home. That part is still something I feel in my bones when I remember it. Not relief exactly, not right away. More like shock, the kind that leaves you standing there, trying to understand that you're finally somewhere safe. Somewhere along that run, I had lost him. Or maybe he gave up. I still don't know. I never heard a clear moment where the sound stopped. That's one of the strangest parts of the memory. I can't point to a second and say, that's when I knew he was gone. At some point during those 15 minutes of panic and sprinting and trying to breathe, either I got far enough away that I couldn't hear him anymore, or he decided not to keep following. But I never saw him leave. I never saw where he went, and I never saw his face. That's one of the things that stayed with me the most over the years. If I had seen him clearly, maybe I could have made some sense of it. Maybe I could have described him. Maybe I could have told someone exactly who was out there on that road, what he looked like, what kind of expression he had, whether he seemed angry or focused or anything else. A face would have made him real in a different way. It would have given the memory something solid to attach to. But I never got that. All I have is the shape of him in the darkness. Tall, thin, just far enough away to stay unclear, and yet close enough to terrify me. And that's sound. that awful, unforgettable sound. Swish, swoosh, swish, swoosh. Even now, years later, if I hear tracksuit pants brushing together the same way, it hits me immediately. Not always in some dramatic way, but enough to send me straight back to that road. Back to that dark stretch of sidewalk where every sound felt too loud and every shadow felt deeper than it should have. It takes almost nothing. Just that rhythm of fabric moving with footsteps, and I can feel the fear rising again before I even have time to think. What makes memories like that so hard to shake is that they don't stay in the past. They wait quietly for something small to wake them up. A sound, a street at night, the feeling of someone behind you, and suddenly you're not fully in the present anymore. You're 10 years old again. You're alone, and someone is speeding up when you speed up. For a long time, I kept replaying the details and asking myself questions that didn't have answers. Was he really chasing me, or was there some explanation I missed? Was he trying to scare me? Was he planning to do something worse? Would he have caught me if I hadn't run when I did? What if I had turned around one more time? What if I had frozen? What if I had convinced myself I was being silly and kept walking at the same pace? Those questions never really go anywhere good. Because the truth is, whatever his intention was, it did not feel random. It did not feel harmless. You can sense when another person's movements are reacting to yours in a way that means something. Every time I moved faster, he moved faster. Every time I tried to create distance, he worked to close it. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't my imagination running wild. Whatever he wanted, he was coming toward me with purpose, and I was 10. That is the part that feels heavier now than it did then. At that age, I understood fear, but I didn't understand how much danger I might actually have been in. I knew enough to run, but not enough to fully grasp what could have happened if I hadn't. Now, as an adult, that understanding sits differently. It adds a deeper layer to the memory, one that makes it more disturbing, not less. Sometimes I think about how thin the line can be between an ordinary memory and a life-changing one. One decision, 1 second of hesitation, one moment where you ignore your instincts instead of listening to them. That night could have become something much worse. Maybe that sounds dramatic, but it's true. I can feel it when I think about it. And there was something waiting on the other side of that hesitation. And somehow I outran it. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know how close he really got. But I know how it felt. I know the silence of that road. I know the weakness of those streetlights and the way the darkness seemed to pool between them. I know what it was like to hear footsteps behind me and to realize they belonged to someone who was paying attention to me. I know what it was like to hear the pace of those steps change when mine changed, and to understand, little by little, that this was no accident. Most of all, I know that feeling of running without looking back, because looking back felt more dangerous than not knowing. That memory stayed with me because it never gave me closure. There was no face, no confrontation, no explanation, no final moment where I knew for certain what had happened. It just ended with me reaching home and surviving. Sometimes surviving is the only ending you get, and maybe that's why it still feels unreal. Not because it seems impossible, but because it came so close to becoming something else, something darker, something I might never have been able to leave behind. Even now, when I think about it, I can still hear that sound coming up behind me out of the dark. Swish, swoosh, swish, swoosh. Closer, faster, matching me. And I still think about what might have happened if I had waited even 1 second longer before I ran, if I had looked back again, if I had doubted myself, if I had ignored the warning my body was already giving me. Because whatever that person was doing, it didn't feel random then, and it doesn't feel random now. It felt like he was coming for me. I was around 11 years old when it happened. And even now, years later, there's something about that moment that never fully settled in my mind. It wasn't loud or dramatic. Nothing extreme happened in the way people usually imagine when they think of bad experiences. But that's exactly what makes it stay with me. It was quiet, subtle, and uncomfortable in a way I didn't fully understand at the time, yet I felt it deeply. It was just a normal trip to Walmart, the kind that blends into 100 other childhood memories. I was there with family, following along as they moved through aisles, looking at things I didn't really care about, waiting while they made decisions that felt like they took forever. At that age, trips like that felt long and boring, but also safe. You're surrounded by people, by bright lights, numbed by the noise of carts and conversations. It's the kind of place where nothing feels like it could go wrong. At some point during the trip, I needed to use the bathroom. It wasn't anything unusual, just a normal part of being out for a while. I told whoever I was with, or maybe I didn't even say much at all, and I made my way toward the restroom. There was no hesitation, no second thought. It was just another small part of the routine. When I walked in, everything looked exactly like you'd expect. Bright overhead lights, the kind that make everything look a little too clean and a little too harsh at the same time. The familiar smell of a public restroom, not terrible, but not pleasant either. There was the sound of running water from the sinks, maybe a hand dryer starting up, and then fading out again. It all blended together into something ordinary, something you don't really notice unless you stop to think about it. There were several urinals along the wall, most of them empty. No one seemed to be paying attention to anyone else. It felt like a normal, everyday situation. The kind where everyone just comes in, does what they need to do, and leaves without thinking twice. I walked up to one of the urinals and faced forward, focused on what I was there to do. At that age, you don't think much about the situation beyond basic comfort. You expect people to give each other space. It's one of those unspoken rules that even kids understand without being told. If there are multiple open spots, you don't stand right next to someone. You spread out. It's just what people do. For a few seconds, everything was normal. Then I heard someone else enter. At first, I didn't pay attention. People come and go all the time in places like that. It's not something you notice unless something gives you a reason to. I kept my eyes forward, minding my own business, expecting that whoever it was would choose one of the other empty spaces. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement right next to me. Someone had stepped up to the urinal directly beside me. That alone felt wrong. There were several empty ones available. He didn't have to stand there. He could have chosen any other spot, and it would have been completely normal. But he didn't. He chose the one right next to me, closing that space in a way that immediately made me uncomfortable. Even as a kid, I felt it. You don't need to understand social rules in detail to know when something isn't right. There was no logical reason for him to be that close, and that realization settled into me almost instantly. I tried to ignore it. I kept my eyes forward, pretending everything was normal. I told myself maybe it didn't mean anything. Maybe he just wasn't thinking. Maybe it was random. I didn't want to believe there was anything wrong because that would mean I had to deal with it. and I didn't know how to do that. But the discomfort didn't go away. It grew. There was this quiet tension building inside me, something I couldn't explain but couldn't ignore either. It felt like my awareness had sharpened all at once. I could feel him there without looking, could sense the closeness in a way that made my chest tighten. Then I made the mistake of glancing over. It was just for a second, just a quick look to confirm whether I was overthinking it. But the moment I turned my head slightly, I realized he was already looking at me. Not casually, not by accident. He was staring directly at me like he had been watching me the whole time. That moment is still clear in my memory. The way it felt, sudden and sharp, like a drop in temperature. Something about that eye contact made everything feel wrong all at once. It wasn't just that he looked at me. It was how intentional it felt, how focused it was. I froze for a second. My mind went blank in that strange way it sometimes does when something unexpected happens. I didn't know what to do, didn't know how to react. I just felt this mix of fear and confusion rising all at once. At that age, you don't have the language for it. You just know you don't feel safe anymore. Then he spoke. His voice broke the silence in a way that made everything worse. He said something about how urinals are supposed to be at least 3 feet apart, that technically we were breaking the law by standing that close. He said it in this strange tone, like he was joking, but the joke didn't feel normal. It didn't feel light or harmless. It felt forced, off, like there was something behind it that I couldn't quite understand. Then he laughed. That laugh stayed with me. It wasn't loud, but it didn't feel right. It didn't match the situation. It didn't make anything less uncomfortable. If anything, it made it worse, because it confirmed that this wasn't just in my head. Something about him, about the way he was acting, was off. I didn't really understand what he meant, not fully, but I understood enough to know I didn't want to be there anymore. I said something back, a quick, quiet response. Probably just yeah, or something like that. Wasn't a real reply. It was just something to fill the silence, something to avoid making things worse. My voice felt small, unsure, like I was trying to get through the moment without drawing attention to myself. All I wanted was to leave. As soon as I could, I pulled away. It wasn't calm or controlled. It was rushed, awkward, somewhere between walking and running. My body was moving before I could even think about it properly. The only thing in my mind was distance. I needed to get away from him. I didn't look back. I didn't check what he was doing. I just left. In that rush, I didn't even realize I hadn't fixed my clothes properly. I walked straight out of the bathroom like that, not noticing until I was already outside. And when I did realize, it added another layer to everything I was feeling. Embarrassment hit on top of fear. My heart was still beating fast from what had just happened. And now there was this added awareness of how I must have looked, how I had rushed out without thinking. It made everything feel more overwhelming, like I couldn't even leave the situation properly. I remember standing there for a moment, trying to collect myself, trying to understand what had just happened. At the time, I didn't really talk about it. Part of that was because I didn't know how to explain it. Nothing happened in the way people usually define something happening. There was no clear line I could point to and say, this is what made it wrong. But the feeling of it, the discomfort, the fear, that was real, and it stayed with me. As I got older, I started to understand it better. I realized that what made it so unsettling wasn't just one thing. It was everything combined. The choice he made to stand right next to me when he didn't have to. The way he looked at me, directly and intentionally. The strange comment, the tone of his voice, the laugh that didn't feel normal. It all felt deliberate, and that's what made it stick. Even now, I can still remember that exact feeling. The moment when everything shifted from normal to wrong without any warning. The realization that I wasn't comfortable anymore, that I needed to leave, that something about the situation wasn't safe. It's strange how moments like that stay with you. Not because they were the worst thing that ever happened, but because they change something small inside you. They make you more aware, more cautious, more tuned in to that quiet feeling when something isn't right. You start to understand that not every dangerous situation looks obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a small shift in the air, a moment that doesn't sit right. And in those moments, the only thing you really have is that instinct, that quiet voice telling you to leave. And sometimes listening to it is the most important thing you can do. When I was in college, I dated a guy who lived on a street that had a very specific kind of atmosphere to it. All the houses looked similar in structure, but they weren't really single homes anymore. Most of them had been divided into separate apartments, usually 2 or 3 units in each building. From the outside, they still looked like old houses, but inside they had been broken up and repurposed over time. It gave the whole street a slightly worn, lived-in feeling, like it had seen a lot of different people come and go over the years. His place was one of those converted houses, and I spent a lot of time there. It became part of my routine to walk up and down that street, sometimes during the day, sometimes later in the evening. Over time, I started to notice the details around me more. Certain houses had lights on, people moving around, music playing faintly through open windows. Others felt quieter, almost empty even when they weren't. There was one house in particular that always stood out. It was right next door to his place, and from the very first time I saw it, it gave off a completely different feeling compared to everything else on the street. It was a small, 2-story brick house, but it didn't look like it belonged there anymore, while the other houses showed signs of life, even if they were old and worn. This one looked like it had been left behind. The driveway was just a stretch of concrete, slightly cracked and uneven, leading up to the side of the house. A chain-link fence ran along part of the property, but it wasn't complete. It looked like it had once enclosed the yard properly. But over time, sections had been damaged or removed, leaving gaps that made it feel more exposed than protected. The yard itself was overgrown. Vines crawled up the sides of the house, wrapping around windows and climbing toward the roof. Moss had settled into the brick, giving it a damp, aged appearance, like it had been sitting untouched for years. No lights ever came on. No one ever went in or out. It was clearly abandoned. Every time I walked past it, I found myself looking at it a little longer than I needed to. There was something about it that pulled at my curiosity. It had that quiet, unsettling presence that certain places have, the kind that makes your imagination start filling in details that you don't actually know. I would find myself wondering what it looked like inside, how long it had been empty, and what might have happened there before it was left the way it was. I remember thinking more than once that it looked like the kind of house people would say was haunted. Not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet, almost believable way. The kind of place where you could imagine stories forming over time, each one adding to the feeling that something about it wasn't right. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. One day, while we were just sitting around talking, I asked my boyfriend about it. I didn't expect much from the answer. I assumed he'd say something simple, like no one lives there anymore, or it's just an old property waiting to be sold. I asked casually, something like, "Does anyone even own that house?" He didn't hesitate when he answered. He told me that someone did own it now, but they didn't go inside anymore. That caught my attention immediately. It wasn't the kind of answer I expected, and it made the whole situation feel a little more interesting. I asked him why, and he gave me two reasons. The first one sounded logical. He explained that the foundation of the house was cracked. Apparently, it wasn't something you could easily see from the outside unless you knew where to stand and what to look for. But if you positioned yourself just right, you could actually see a crack running down through the structure, wide enough in some places that light would come through it. The house was still standing, but it wasn't stable. Because of that, it had been condemned, meaning it wasn't considered safe for anyone to live in or even enter. That made sense. Old houses deteriorate, especially when they're not maintained. A structural issue like that would be enough to explain why it had been abandoned. For a moment, I thought that was the end of the story. It felt like a reasonable explanation, something grounded and real. But then he told me the second reason, and that's when the tone of the conversation changed. He said that before the house had been condemned, there had been a tenant living there, an older man. From what he described, the man seemed normal on the surface. Quiet, maybe a little eccentric, but nothing that would immediately raise concerns. The kind of person neighbors might describe as polite, but distant. Someone who kept to himself. What stood out most about him was that he liked cats. He had several of them, both inside and outside the house. It wasn't unusual for people to have pets, even multiple pets. So at first, that didn't sound strange either. It just painted a picture of a lonely older man who found comfort in animals. Then, according to the story, he died in the house. It wasn't anything suspicious. It was said to be from old age, something natural and expected. At that point, the story still felt grounded. Sad maybe, but not unusual. It's the kind of thing that happens, especially with older people living alone. But what happened after that is what made everything feel different. When whoever came to collect his body entered the house, they apparently looked around, as people do in those situations. And what they found inside was disturbing. There were dead cats. Not just one or two, but many. And not just dead in a normal sense. According to what my boyfriend told me, they had been mutilated. I remember feeling this immediate discomfort as he explained it. The idea alone was enough to shift how I saw that house. He didn't go into graphic detail, but he didn't need to. The image formed in my mind on its own, and it wasn't something I wanted there. I asked him if he meant the man had been killing them. He said he didn't know for sure. It was possible the cats had died naturally, and the man had done something to them afterward. It was also possible that he had been the one causing their deaths. Either way, the result was the same. There had been a large number of dead cats inside that house, and something about the condition they were found in suggested more than just neglect. At one point, my boyfriend described it in a way that stuck with me. He said the man had been performing unnecessary surgeries on the cats. That phrasing made it feel even worse. It turned something vague into something more intentional, more disturbing. It suggested a level of involvement that went beyond something accidental or passive. It implied choice. After he finished telling me all of that, I didn't really know what to say. Part of me wondered if he was just messing with me. It wouldn't have been completely out of character for someone to exaggerate or make up a story like that, especially about a place that already looked eerie. It could have been an urban legend, something that had been passed around and changed over time until no one really knew what was true anymore. But there was also a part of me that considered the possibility that it was real, that maybe something like that had actually happened. And that thought stayed with me. From that point on, the house didn't feel the same. Before, it had just been an abandoned building with an interesting look, something that sparked my imagination in a harmless way. But after hearing that story, it carried a different kind of weight. Every time I walked past it, I couldn't help but think about what I had been told. I would glance at the windows, even though they were dark and empty. I would notice the vines creeping up the walls, the way they seemed to take over more space over time. I would feel this quiet sense of unease settle in, even though nothing was actually happening in that moment. It wasn't like I ever saw anything strange there. No movement, no sounds, no signs that anyone had been inside since it was abandoned. But the idea of what might have happened there was enough to change how it felt. I started walking a little faster whenever I passed it. Sometimes I would avoid looking at it altogether. Other times, I would catch myself staring at it again. The same curiosity still there, but now mixed with something else, something heavier. Even now, I don't know what the truth was. Maybe my ex was just telling a story. Maybe it was something he had heard from someone else and believed. Or maybe it really happened exactly the way he described it. I never found out for sure. But in a way, that uncertainty made it linger even more. Because without a clear answer, my mind was free to fill in the gaps, to imagine details that may or may not have been real. And that house, sitting there quietly next door, became more than just an abandoned building. It became a place tied to a story I couldn't quite shake. Something that turned an ordinary street into something that felt just a little more unsettling every time I walked past it. I remember that day pretty clearly, mostly because of how normal it felt at the time. I had gone to a thrift store, just browsing like I usually did, hoping to find something useful without spending much money. Winters where I was living were no joke, and I needed a decent jacket, but I also didn't want to pay full price for one. Thrift stores were always a bit of a gamble, but sometimes you'd get lucky and find something great for almost nothing. The store itself had that familiar second-hand feel, a mix of different smells, old fabric, a bit of dust, maybe something faintly chemical from cleaning products. Racks of clothes packed tightly together, everything slightly disorganized, but still arranged enough that you could dig through it if you had the patience. I spent a while going through jackets, pulling some out, checking sizes, holding them up, then putting most of them back. Nothing really stood out. At some point, I wandered away from the clothing section and started looking at random items. That's usually how it goes. You go in for one thing, and then you start looking at everything else just because it's there. Shelves filled with mismatched objects, things people didn't want anymore, but that somehow still had a place sitting there, waiting for someone else to take them home. That's when I saw the alarm clock. It was nothing special, just a basic one, the kind you'd expect to see anywhere. But it was only $2, and for some reason, that felt like a deal. I didn't already have an alarm clock, and even though I could have easily used something else to wake up, the idea of getting one for that cheap made it seem like a smart purchase. I picked it up, I looked it over for a second, and decided to buy it without much thought. It was just one of those small, impulsive decisions that don't seem important at the time. I didn't find a jacket, so I left the store with a $2 alarm clock instead. Later that night, everything felt completely normal. I had something to do the next morning, which meant I needed to wake up earlier than usual. Normally, I'd sleep in a bit. But this time I had to be up at 8 a.m., which was about 2 hours earlier than my usual schedule. It wasn't a big deal, just slightly inconvenient. I set up the alarm clock, making sure it was set correctly, placed it nearby where I could hear it, and got ready for bed. There was nothing strange about it. It was just a simple routine. I didn't think about the clock again after that. I went to sleep without any concern. At first, everything was fine. I remember having normal dreams, the kind that don't really stand out once you wake up. They felt light, maybe even good. Nothing about them felt off or unsettling. It was just regular sleep, nothing unusual. And then, suddenly, the dream changed. I found myself standing in a completely different place. It was dark, but not completely pitch black. There was just enough light to make out shapes and details around me. I was in what looked like a large warehouse, the kind of place that feels empty and quiet in a heavy way. The space around me was open, with high ceilings and wide areas that seemed to stretch out beyond where I could clearly see. The first thing I noticed was what was hanging around me. There were large pieces of meat suspended from hooks, spaced out in rows. They hung at different heights, some closer to me, others further away, creating this strange, almost maze-like feeling as I stood there. They swayed slightly, like something had disturbed the air, even though I couldn't feel any movement around me. It was unsettling, but at first I didn't react strongly to it. Dreams can be strange, and sometimes you just accept what's happening without questioning it. That's how it felt in that moment. I was aware of my surroundings, aware that something was off, but I wasn't panicking yet. Then I heard the sound. It's hard to describe exactly what it was. Calling it a screech doesn't fully capture it, but it's the closest word I can think of. It wasn't just loud. It felt wrong. There was something sharp and unnatural about it, something that seemed to cut through everything else in the space. It echoed in a way that made it feel like it was coming from everywhere at once, not just a single direction. The moment I heard it, everything inside me reacted. There was this immediate sense of fear, like my body recognized something before my mind could catch up. Without even thinking about it, I looked up, and that's when I saw it. High above me, maybe 20 feet up, near the rafters of the warehouse, there was something there, a figure. It was dark, almost blending into the shadows, but I could still make out its outline. It didn't look human, at least not in a way that felt normal. It was just there, watching. The only thing I could clearly see were its eyes, bright red and fixed directly on me. That was the part that locked everything in place. It felt like the moment I looked at it, something connected between us. I couldn't look away. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something deeper, something that made me feel completely exposed, like I was being studied, like I had been noticed in a way I couldn't escape from. Time in the dream stretched out. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. It felt like forever. Every second dragged heavy and intense, like I was stuck in that moment with no way out. The silence after the sound made it worse, like the entire space was holding its breath. I wanted to move. I wanted to run. But just like in those kinds of dreams, my body didn't respond. I was frozen, completely focused on those eyes. The fear kept building, growing stronger with each passing second until it reached a point where it felt overwhelming. And then I woke up. It wasn't a slow or gentle waking. It was sudden, like being pulled out of something. My eyes opened, and for a second, I didn't know where I was. That feeling from the dream was still there, lingering, making everything feel off. Then I heard it. The alarm clock. It was going off loud and steady, filling the room with its sound. I looked at the time. 8:10. For a moment, I just lay there trying to process everything. The dream, the noise, the way it had all happened so suddenly. My heart was still racing, my body still tense, like I hadn't fully come back from whatever that was. The timing felt strange, too close. It was like the sound in the dream and the alarm had blurred together somehow, like one had triggered the other, or they had overlapped in a way I couldn't quite explain. I didn't like it. Within 30 minutes, that alarm clock was gone. I didn't think about it too much. I didn't try to rationalize it or figure it out. I just knew I didn't want it in my room anymore. Something about it felt wrong after that, even if it didn't make complete sense. I threw it in the trash. Later, I told my roommate about the dream. I described the warehouse, the hanging meat, the sound, and especially the figure in the rafters. The more I talked about it, the more real it felt again, like I was pulling pieces of it back into the present. He didn't react the way I expected. Instead of brushing it off, he looked a little uneasy, like the story had gotten to him more than he wanted to admit. It made the whole thing feel even stranger, like it wasn't just me overthinking it. In the end, nothing else happened. It was just one night, one dream. But it stuck with me in a way I didn't expect. And the weirdest part is that I never did get that jacket. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.